We have some very prominent speakers this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to all of you to our conference on human rights in Iraq. Can I start by making some opening remarks? Your Excellencies, Dr. Rafع al-Rafai, the Grand Mufti of Iraq, ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Last November I was in Iraq and I met then with many leading politicians, religious leaders, and with courageous men and women who led popular uprisings and protests in Al-Anbar and 6 of the provinces of Iraq and in many Iraqi cities. The message from all the people I met when I was in Iraq last November was identical. They told me that lawlessness, terrorism, corruption, the systematic abuse of human rights are each a daily feature of life in Iraq. They told me that Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, many ministers told me that he is rapidly becoming a dictator. They told me that modern Iraq is simply a dust bowl of violence and bloodshed. More than 9,500 people died last year in bomb attacks and assassinations in an increasingly ugly insurgency that threatens to take the country back to the civil war that erupted between 2006 and 2008. Over 1,000 people have died so far this year. 30 people were killed yesterday in a bomb attack in Baghdad. And it was these same people who I met last November, people from different ethnic backgrounds, from different faiths and creeds, but who share the desire to see freedom, democracy, justice, and peace restored to their country, who urged me to organize today's conference so that they could come to the European Parliament and reveal the truth about Iraq to the West. And I'm deeply grateful to all of them, and I thank them for the expense, effort, and courage that they have expended to come here today. You will hear from these eminent experts how Maliki is using the Iraqi military in a genocidal campaign of ethnic cleansing against the Sunni population in Ramadi and Fallujah, aided and abetted by a generous supply of missiles, rockets, drones, helicopters, and other weaponry from the US, which he uses to slaughter his own people on the pretext that they are terrorists. The brother of the Grand Mufti was killed by a bomb attack in Fallujah 5 days ago, and my great condolences to you, Your Excellency. 5 days ago, his brother, a sheikh, was he Daesh? Was he Al-Qaeda? Of course not. The children that are being killed there by rocket and missile attacks and bombardments, are they Al-Qaeda? Are the women? Of course not. And you will hear from our guests today how the many ethnic groups who for generations lived in peaceful harmony side by side with the majority Shia and Sunni communities now suffer systematic abuse despite being guaranteed safety and security in a multi-faith society enshrined by the Iraqi constitution. You will hear how Nouri al-Maliki has become a puppet of Iran and its hardline mullahs, pursuing an increasingly sectarian campaign, ruthlessly removing all Sunni politicians from influential government positions, and cracking down hard on dissent. The predictable Sunni backlash has unleashed a storm of violence directed not only at the Shiite community, but inevitably targeting ethnic minorities. The Christian population of Iraq, once estimated at over 1.5 million, is now down to less than half that figure, with many Christians fleeing abroad or to Kurdistan for safety. Soon, some people think that one of the oldest Christian communities in the world may become extinct. But they are not the only minority facing ethnic cleansing. There are only now around 3,500 Mandaean Sabaeans left from a previous population estimated at 70,000 a mere 10 years ago. Iraq's Jews have suffered extreme persecution since the 1950s, and there are now an estimated 10 individuals, 10, not 10,000, 10 individuals left living in the country from an original population of over 150,000. Other ethnic groups like the Turkmen, the Baha'i, the Shabak, the Yazidi minorities all suffered discrimination despite their rights being guaranteed in the Constitution. Iraq is teetering on the brink of becoming a failed state. Billions of dollars in oil wealth are simply disappearing, with most of the population still having only around 4 hours of electricity daily, limited access to clean drinking water or functioning sewerage systems, and now in Iraq, which used to win prizes for literacy, 60% of the population are illiterate. Unemployment is now running at over 18%, and with more than half the population under the age of 25, many young Iraqis are being tempted to take the law into their own hands. And the reaction of the government has been to increase oppression. State-condoned torture and mass executions are now commonplace. 37 people were executed in a single week in January this year. In a single week. The UN has criticized what they call a conveyor belt of executions. Groups of men and women, sometimes as many as 12 or 15 at a time, are executed in scenes reminiscent of the Nazis during the Second World War. One woman who'd been tortured by the Iraqi authorities and whose daughter was threatened with rape was executed after giving evidence to Human Rights Watch. I think this is absolutely scandalous, but I've yet to hear a word of condemnation from the EU, the US, or the UN. Another woman who had to attend the interview with Human Rights Watch on crutches on death row in Baghdad's notorious Kazamaya prison described how she had suffered 9 days of beating, shocks, and being hung upside down, which had left her permanently disabled. Her jaw had been broken, and prison guards told her that they had arrested her daughter and that she would be tortured and raped unless she signed a confession. Based on such testimonies and confessions gained under barbaric tortures, she and hundreds of other women have been sentenced to death. She also was executed a few weeks after giving that interview to Human Rights Watch. On 1st September last year, Maliki ordered a hit squad of specially trained assassins to attack a refugee camp called Camp Ashraf, where they handcuffed and summarily executed 52 unarmed civilians simply because they are opponents of the Iranian mullahs. 7 hostages were abducted, 6 of whom are women. Nothing has been heard of them since. There were repeated calls for the hostages to be released and for those responsible for the attack to be brought to justice. And now, in the last few days, in what I believe is another act reminiscent of the Nazis in Europe in the Second World War, that the Iraqi government, who had control of the 52 bodies from the massacre in Camp Ashraf last September, he announced last week that they had disposed of the bodies, despite the fact that UNAMI were insisting on the bodies being formally autopsied in order that they could conclude how they had been killed, what weaponry had been used to murder them. So they have been secretly disposed of to hide the evidence of their murder from the international community. If anything could provide clearer evidence of the complete involvement of the Iraqi authorities in this horrific massacre, then that is surely it. The UN, US and EU must tell Nouri al-Maliki that his whirlwind of bloodshed, violence, corruption and abuse will no longer be tolerated. Unless there are free and fair elections on the 30th of April that can restore a semblance of democracy to Iraq and provide the beleaguered people of that country with a non-sectarian, secular government committed to the restoration of the rule of law and respect for human rights, then the economic umbilical cord to the West must be severed. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference today plays into some key issues that are taking place in the Parliament right now. Our Directorate General for External Policies have just published this report called Iraq's Deadly Spiral Towards a Civil War, which is a document which repeats much of what I've just said to you. So today, the discussions we have will play very much into that forum to provide us with the kind of evidence that we need to produce a resolution.